Conference will now be recorded.
Thank you, Brother Ash. Good morning, PK. Lovely to see you. Excellent. So, I walked out of Newland Mall the other day, the countdown entrance, and immediately to the left of me there was a guy on a park bench with a cardboard sign saying, "Any spare change, please help me." And I stalled. I thought, I've got no money in my wallet. There is an ATM machine back in the mall. I just know exactly where it is. If I walk straight down there and to the left there's ASB, that's all there. But I carried on walking and I crossed the road into the car park towards where my car was parked, and I stopped again. And I was like, I just got to check my wallet because I think I've got nothing in it. Confirmed, nothing in my wallet. And I stopped. I couldn't keep walking. I was like, okay, but the ATM machine is just in there. What do I do? But I have thought about giving to some people. I feel like I'd done it earlier in the week, and I was wondering about our bank balance. And so I carried on walking to my car. And my car was ages away. Well, it's a big car park, you know, the car park in Newland. And as I'm walking, I'm finding it really hard. I'm like, but I'm the guy that's supposed to be preaching about this giving. Then I was like, I think I have given already this week. I feel okay. I don't know if our bank balance is that good, but I'm the guy that's supposed to be presenting this. And all this conflict was happening in my head as I was walking to my car the whole way. And it was a long way and it was annoying. But I got all the way to my car. And then I sat in my car. And then, by some amazing miracle, you might think, this thinking came upon me. This thinking. And I'm going to share this thinking with you this morning. This thinking that came into my mind, it literally launched me out of the car. It gave me this new energy. It gave me pleasure. It wiped all doubts from my mind. I knew what I must do in that moment. It gave me clarity. There was no conflict in my brain anymore. And I launched back into that shop and I went straight to the ATM machine and I had an interaction with that man on the bench. I want to share you with the thinking that came to me in that moment when I sat in the car as an exhort this morning. The poor is where we're looking, and we are really focusing on the abundance, God's provision and abundance. And so really, who is God? The Lord is high above all heavens, his glory above the heavens. Who is like the Lord our God? Who is seated on high? Who looks far down on the heavens and the earth? And he raises the poor from the dust, and he lifts the needy from the ash heap. God's abundance. We want to have a visual of God's abundance, and we will start here. God planted a Garden of Eden in the east, and there he put a man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. And so this Eden, this word Eden, when it's not used as a name of a garden, it's actually used elsewhere in the scripture for delight and pleasure and luxury and abundance. And so the Bible is describing this lush, fertile garden with trees pleasing to the eye, good for food, rivers that watered the area. It was a paradise where God supported life, and it was perfect for the dwelling place of Adam and Eve, perfect for them to flourish. Man was required to do a little bit. In Genesis 2:15, Lord took the man and put him in the garden to keep it, to work with it. And that word keep is the word shema, which is protect and preserve. Surely, God said, you can eat of every tree in the garden. I assume that the amount of work that man put in did not equal the amount of abundance that was provided in that garden. It was a monumental providing from God, far exceeding the needs of the man. Of course, man could not repay God, like in that parable we heard in Luke. The invitation to the poor, to the wedding feast, these were the people that could not repay the master who was extending the invitation. God far exceeded the work that man put into this garden in the way that he provided for them. It's so unfortunate that this scene ended, but by God's grace, it became a promise of the future, that this harmony and abundance in this garden will be restored. So, however, this side of the restoration of Eden, we're not there yet, just saying. Not all is lost, I just want to tell you. There has been little glimpses of Eden throughout the ages, just reminders of God's abundance. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of these few scenes of Eden that have been experienced by humans when they found themselves in the care of their Maker. So we're just going to go through a few scenes, maybe three max. And the first scene we're going to look at is the desert, ironically, because God saved his people from slavery. He took them by the hand, it says, and he led them to the desert. This was a place of nothingness, emptiness, death, actually. So, as you'd understand, the people complained and they feared. But in Exodus 16, verse 13, it says this: that evening, quail came and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. People said, "What is that?" And Moses answered, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." And so we know it was called manna. And it was like coriander seed, wafers tasted of honey, and it had the appearance like that of bdellium. So with absolutely no input from the people, God provided for their needs in this place of utter emptiness. It was a little bit like Eden, perhaps. In fact, this word bdellium, the Hebrew word, is only found twice in the Bible, and the first time it's found is in Eden, this place where there was abundance and there was precious stones like the onyx and bdellium. So we can conclude this manna was Eden bread. This was Eden abundance. And this was provided by God with little to no input from the people to sustain their life. I want to show you another scene of Eden. The people take possession of the promised land. And everyone, according to the way Joshua divided the land, everyone inherited their own little patch of land. God made it very clear, however, in Leviticus, the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. Don't forget that. But the people here now, in this situation, can grow their own food, unlike the wilderness. And under the law, what we're going to go through is what they were to provide and what they were to use this land for. Because it was a time of abundance, but not for everybody. As Moses said in the chapter we just read, there will always be poor in the land. Remember, Jesus said that too. There will always be poor in the land. So there were some people not experiencing abundance. And these people, through no fault of their own, would remain, if you like, in the wilderness, reliant on God to provide their daily bread. With no resources of their own, with no land they could work, they would need food provided to them. So I'm going to give you a Jewish calendar. So let's have a look at the Jewish calendar. And we want to look at all the times that the people who had land had to use the land to provide, not only for themselves, but for others. So we'll go through it now. First one that we could mention is the very first fruits. This is found in Deuteronomy 26. When you have entered the land that the Lord is giving you, take some of your first fruits that you've produced from the soil that God has given you and put them in a basket. And then you were to go to a place that God would appoint, and you would declare this thing to the priest. And you would say all these words, all about my father was a wandering Aramean. And then we grew and developed and became a great nation, ended up in Egypt, and we got oppressed, and God brought us out. He brought us, they were to continue saying, to this place, and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and now I will bring the first fruits of the soil that you, Lord, have given me. And they will place the basket in front of the priests, and then you and the Levites and the foreigners residing among you shall rejoice in all the good things that the Lord your God has given you. The Levites and the foreigners would enjoy this produce. The very first stuff that you could grow on your land was given to the foreigners. Very interesting, because the people had just been foreigners. Now they were hosts, and they were now hosting the foreigners. And the foreigners around them who had no land and no inheritance could be provided for, just in the same way that they were provided for as foreigners. Next one is in Deuteronomy 26, and it flows right on. It's called the year of the tithe. And when you have finished setting aside a tenth of your produce in the third year, so every 3 years you are to set aside a tenth of all that your land produced, and you will give it to the Levite and the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow, so that they may eat in your towns and be satisfied. And just like the last time, they had to say stuff. You've got to say stuff when you present this food. And you've got to say to the Lord, I have removed from my house the sacred portion, and I've given it to the Levite and the foreigner and the father. It's called the sacred portion. This is not yours. This is sacred. This is mine, says God. And that's where it's going, to the poor. I'm going to place it roughly there, because it's every third year. And now we have the festivals. Oh, yes. These were a time of great rejoicing. Deuteronomy chapter 16. Count off 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. And your first festival will be the festival of weeks. And you will rejoice before the Lord. The Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows, you were to take and gather what you wanted. This was a free will offering, and bring it and rejoice with those that could not provide their own food. Festival of Weeks. This was another joyful festival. This came in about here. And this one was centered around taking the produce of the threshing floor and the winepress. So this time it's grain and wine. And you would bring what abundance you had and what you felt was okay of a free will offering, and you would provide it for the foreigners and the fatherless and the widows, and they would rejoice with you. And that's happening about down there in that month. There's another festival. This is the unleavened bread. This is the Passover. Now, it doesn't specifically mention exactly what they had to bring, but it does say this: 3 times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord at the place he will choose. These 3 feasts he's talking about. and no one shall appear empty-handed. So I would suggest from that even at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Passover, you were still to bring something, a gift. No one was to appear empty-handed. So what do we have here so far? We've got a one-off offering, the very first stuff that produced from your land. We've got a 1 in every 3 years offering, and then we've got these 3 feasts that would happen once every single year that we are providing for the poor and those around us. I'm going to extend it to one more feast, but this happened much later. Remember, Esther initiated the Feast of Purim. This is still celebrated today, and that came in the month of Adar. And Esther said when she initiated that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, days of sending gifts of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So Esther initiated Purim. But you're probably wondering about the gleaning, because that was a thing. That was a right given to the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow. When you are harvesting your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back and get it. It doesn't give you specific guidelines there about what you are leaving, but remember, Boaz decided he's going to dump more. He's going to purposely drop more for the widows that were in his field. Leviticus 19 also extends this when it says, when you're harvesting, don't harvest right up to the edges. Leave a strip. And you can imagine all the land joined together after harvest time. You'd actually see all the boundaries of all the lands because they'd be marked by these strips of wheat, all left intact, and they would be for the poor and the foreigner. And I'll put that on the Jewish calendar covering the barley and the grain harvest. So there will be a time of giving there. So in that bracket, I'm saying there'll be an opportunity to go and pick up stuff that has been left over, and also from the edges of those harvests. Olive harvest. Well, that came in down here, according to this Jewish calendar. And the idea of the olive harvest was that when you beat your olive trees, don't go over them a second time. So everything that would drop to the ground that was yours, and everything that remained on the tree, the stuff that wasn't quite right, don't go out next week and beat that. No, that would be for the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow. And you're probably wondering about the grape harvest, because that's right. When we are growing grapes and you're harvesting your grapes, do not go over your vines a second time. And even the stuff that's dropped, leave it, and it will be left for the foreigner and the fatherless and the widow. And that covers that summer fruit time area when they were growing grapes. Starting to fill up this calendar, and we're filling up the times when the poor can go onto your land and take what they need. Here's an interesting one, the neighbour's harvest. Nothing to do with the poor, nothing to do with the fatherless. If you enter your neighbour's vineyard, you may eat all the grapes you want, but don't put them in your basket. Just make sure that when you turn up, you just handpick stuff, feed your face, and walk out. Same with the grain. Don't put it in a basket though. So you can eat to your full, but don't gather anything. I would say that suggests that's covering the grain and the grape harvest quite well there. But I would suggest it would cover some of the other harvests as well. And what about the Sabbath land? Now the Sabbath land was very interesting. In the 7th year, you were to leave your land, or leave a portion of your land at rest. And so whatever grew, and what does it say here? We're not sowing, we're not pruning, but whatever grows of itself, whatever the land yields during that Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your male and female servants, the hired worker, and the temporary resident who live among you. And in extension, in Exodus it says the poor may feed from this as well. This is stuff that probably would have seed in the ground from your last harvest. It'll sprout up. a harvest. It'll sprout up some of the crops, perhaps, and in part, it'll obviously sprout up some weeds as well. It might sprout up some blackberries that you've been trying to keep down because they're annoying, but then they'll fruit. Um, this is the same as you would do with your vines. Don't prune them, just let them go crazy and they will grow grapes as per normal. So that means after 7 years, though, and from however long into the future, provided this law has been provided, there was always going to be a little patch on your land that you weren't allowed to touch that would be growing food of itself that would be a free for all for anyone to go in, including you. So, Sabbath, what is that? I've chosen to take most of the calendar year for the Sabbath for that little patch of land because I feel like it probably wouldn't grow too well in wintertime, perhaps. But maybe there's some winter crops that'll be provided in that land as well. But hey, it was fair game. It was all good for you to go on and pluck and eat of that little patch of land. It just didn't matter what time of the year, there was going to be a little patch of land for you to go on if you needed. So the Sabbath to me really typifies God resting and God's abundance on a whole nother level, isn't it? The way that he rested after his creation. But now we're supposed to rest here and let this land provide. God's providing. But the one thing you'd have to get used to in this situation is random people on your land. Just rocking onto your land, eating your stuff. And you know what? You'd have to get used to it. Because this is the land that God gave you. And this is the strength that God provided you to work the land. And it may not be as random as what I'm suggesting, because you're a part of a small community, aren't you? And this whole system is designed to look after each other. And because you might actually know that your neighbour had a hard time and he injured himself and he couldn't put his crops in. And there's your neighbour out in your field just plucking some grapes, and that's okay. And you might know that old Jeremiah died and left his wife and children, left a widow and fatherless children, and they're struggling to produce off their land, and they're on your property taking some of your grain, and that's okay. And you might have heard about some conflict between Moab and Edom, and some Edomites, some refugee Edomites have turned up, and they might be on your land plucking your olives, and that's okay. And I'd just like to say, this is the thinking that launched me out of my car that day. Providing the way God provides, providing a little patch of Eden. These people that lived in the wilderness could come onto your little Eden and pluck and eat and be filled. And you were providing that just in the same way God was. It's a high level way of representing God. You might be looking here though and thinking there's some gaps. Well, don't you worry, Deuteronomy 15 comes in, doesn't it? Deuteronomy 15, if anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land your God has given you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord will bless you in all the work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. God is setting them up so that they can provide a portion of Eden, so that those that can't provide for themselves will have enough. All the gaps are filled. At any point in the calendar year, there was going to be provision for somebody. All the charity shops get shut down. There's no need for foundations and give a little pages. They all are finished. They don't exist anymore because everyone is providing enough for everyone. What an amazing law, by the way. Who's trying to think that this law is old and obsolete? It is so incredibly advanced, isn't it? So I want to provide for this beggar outside countdown because God has provided me with so much. And the other day I turn up at class and Naomi's there with my dinner. I didn't ask for dinner, but I was hungry and I could have done with dinner. And she turns up with dinner. And I'm like, wow, thank you, Naomi. She'd probably seen me turn up to class hungry before, and I'd been provided food by Robert and Sharon because they'd offered me to come to their house. And if I couldn't make it to their house, they'd bring food to the class. So there I was at the back eating food, and I've been provided a number of times by Robert and Sharon. And that's off the back of Val Martin, who was providing me food for when I was doing the English Chinese lessons, because I was often not organised. And that reminds me of Val Martin's supper last Wednesday night. Did you see that supper? That supper was Eden. This side of Eden, before the Eden is restored to us, we saw laid out before us a portion of Eden. Brothers and sisters, I recommend that you do not look who's speaking on last night. You look who's providing supper. And we experienced Eden, and it was a little taste of what is to come. And so Solomon says this amazing statement: whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. And Solomon is speaking to this. He's very justified because he's speaking from a time of great abundance. And there is enough to go round. So you will insult your maker if you do not provide to the poor. But if you do give, then you reflect God. And how we interact with the poor is a direct reflection of our relationship with God. And when we give to the poor, we're giving to God. Have a look at that person that's in front of you. They are made in God's image. And you are handing to God this God-given abundance back to God. So this is the thinking again that got me out of the car to provide for this man. So if we can, and we should try to do this, we could try and show people that this is a taste of what's coming. Jesus is coming, and Jesus is the man who turns 5 loaves and 2 fish into a magnificent banquet, feeding 5,000 men, women, and children to their fullness with leftovers. And then 4,000 men plus women and children to the brim with leftovers. Jesus will return and he will restore this Garden of Eden. And this is what our future looks like: human flourishing and life in abundance.